The dog had one eye, 3 legs, and a past no one at the shelter could explain. He had been returned 4 times. Aggressive, they said. Unpredictable. Broken beyond repair. But when 62-year-old Martha walked into that shelter on a cold November morning, something shifted. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply looked at her with his one remaining eye and let out a sound she would never forget. A low, mournful whine, as if he had been waiting for her all along. She signed the papers that afternoon. What Martha didn't know was that this broken dog would lead her to a secret buried in her own home for over 4 decades. A secret hidden beneath the floorboards of her attic. A secret that would finally explain the sister she lost and the goodbye she never received. Martha stood there for a long moment, clutching the adoption papers in her trembling hands. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile, unforgiving glow. She didn't know why she was crying. She barely knew this animal. But something about the way he had looked at her, the way he had chosen her in that moment of connection, felt like the most important thing that had happened to her in years, maybe in decades. The Greenfield County Animal Shelter sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building surrounded by chain-link fences and the constant echo of barking dogs. Martha had driven past it 1,000 times over the years, but had never once considered stopping. She wasn't a dog person. She had never been a dog person. Her late husband Richard had been allergic, and before that, growing up, her family had never kept pets. Animals were unpredictable, she always thought. They needed too much. They left too soon. But on that particular November morning, something pulled her off the main road and into the gravel parking lot. Maybe it was the gray sky pressing down on the town like a heavy blanket. Maybe it was the fact that she had woken up at 3 a.m. again, staring at the ceiling of her empty bedroom, listening to the silence that had swallowed her house since Richard passed 18 months ago. Or maybe it was the dream she'd had, the one about Eleanor, standing in the doorway of their childhood bedroom, saying something Martha couldn't quite hear before dissolving into shadow. She hadn't dreamed about her sister in years, decades even. And yet there Eleanor was, vivid and young, frozen at the age she had been when she disappeared. 24 years old, hair the color of autumn leaves, eyes that always seemed to be looking at something no one else could see. Martha shook off the memory as she pushed through the shelter's front door. A bell chimed overhead, and the smell hit her immediately. Disinfectant and wet fur and something indefinably sad. A young woman behind the counter looked up with a practiced smile. "Good morning. Are you here to adopt, or just looking today?" Martha hesitated. She hadn't planned this. She didn't know what she was doing here. The words came out before she could stop them. "I suppose I'm looking." The volunteer, her name tag read Casey, led Martha through a heavy door into the kennels. The barking intensified, a chorus of desperate voices competing for attention. Dogs of every size and color pressed against their cage doors, tails wagging, tongues lolling, eyes bright with hope. Martha walked slowly down the aisle, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer need radiating from each enclosure. "Looking for anything in particular?" Casey asked. "We've got some great family dogs. A few puppies came in last week if you want something younger." "I live alone," Martha said quietly. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for." They continued walking. Martha paused occasionally, reading the information cards attached to each cage. Max, 4 years old, loves belly rubs. Bella, 2 years old, good with children. Duke, 6 years old, needs a yard. Each dog seemed to blur into the next, their eager faces becoming a single mass of longing. And then she reached the last cage on the row, tucked into a corner where the fluorescent light flickered intermittently. The dog inside wasn't pressing against the door. He wasn't wagging his tail or barking for attention. He was lying in the far corner, his back to the aisle, as if he had given up on being seen. Martha stopped. "What about this one?" Casey's smile faltered. "Oh, we call him Ghost. He's been here a while." "Ghost." He doesn't really respond to any names, so the staff just started calling him that. Because he's so quiet, I guess, and because... She trailed off. Martha looked at the information card. Unlike the others, it was sparse. Approximate age, 7 to 9 years, mixed breed, special needs. What happened to him? Casey sighed. "We're not entirely sure. He was found wandering near the old mill on Route 12 about a year ago. No collar, no chip. One of his eyes was already gone, probably an old injury. He lost the leg a few months after coming here. Got tangled in the fence trying to escape one night. Infection set in before we caught it." She paused. "He's been returned 4 times. The first family said he howled all night. The second one said he was aggressive, though he's never shown any aggression here. The third didn't even last a week, said he gave them the creeps. The fourth..." She shook her head. "They just brought him back without explanation." Martha stepped closer to the cage. The dog still hadn't moved. "Can I go in?" Casey looked uncertain. "I should warn you, he doesn't really interact with people. He won't hurt you, but he won't exactly greet you either. He just exists." "I'd like to try." Casey unlocked the cage and held the door open. Martha stepped inside slowly, her heart beating faster than she expected. The dog remained motionless, his one eye closed, his breathing slow and even. She lowered herself to the cold concrete floor, ignoring the protest from her aging knees. For a long moment she simply sat there, not reaching out, not speaking, just breathing the same air as this creature that had been deemed too broken to love. "Hello," she finally whispered. The dog's ear twitched. "I know how you feel," Martha continued, her voice barely audible. "Being alone in a room full of people, feeling like no one really sees you." The dog's eye opened. Slowly, he turned his head to look at her. Martha felt her breath catch. The eye that met hers was deep brown, almost amber, and it held an intelligence that startled her. But more than that, there was something familiar in that gaze, something that tugged at a place inside her she had kept locked away for 40 years. The dog let out a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but a low, mournful whine that seemed to vibrate through Martha's chest. It was the sound of recognition, the sound of finding something you didn't know you had lost. "Oh," she breathed, her eyes suddenly stinging with tears she didn't understand. "There you are." The dog rose unsteadily on his 3 legs and limped toward her. He stopped inches from her knees, looking up at her with that single, knowing eye. Then, gently, he rested his head on her lap. Martha placed her hand on his scarred head, feeling the rough texture of old wounds beneath her fingers. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know why she was crying, or why this broken, abandoned creature felt like the answer to a question she had been asking her entire life. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was taking him home. The paperwork took longer than expected. The shelter wanted to ensure Martha understood what she was getting into, the medical needs, the behavioral challenges, the uncertainty of his past. She signed every form without hesitation. When Casey asked what name she wanted to put on the adoption certificate, Martha paused. "What was his name before? The first family that adopted him?" Casey checked the records. They called him Buddy. But like I said, he never responded to it. Martha looked at the dog sitting patiently beside her, his eye fixed on her face, as if he was afraid she might disappear. "I'll call him Solomon," she said quietly. "It means peace." Solomon's tail moved, not a full wag, but a small, tentative sweep across the floor. It was the first time the shelter staff had seen him react positively to anything in months. The drive home took 20 minutes, but to Martha it felt like crossing into another life. Solomon sat in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, watching the gray landscape scroll past. He didn't whine or fidget. He simply watched, as if memorizing the route. Martha's house sat at the end of Maple Street, a Victorian two-story that she and Richard had bought 35 years ago. It was too big for one person. They had always planned to fill it with children, but that dream had never materialized. After Richard died, Martha had considered selling. The empty rooms felt like accusations, reminding her of all the life that should have happened within these walls but never did. She pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither she nor Solomon moved. "This is home," Martha said softly. "Or at least, it's supposed to be." Solomon turned his head to look at the house, his body tensed slightly, ears pricking forward. Martha watched him, curious about his reaction. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't respond. He was staring at the house with an intensity that made Martha's skin prickle. Specifically, he seemed to be staring at the small window on the upper left corner of the second floor. The attic window. Martha hadn't been up to the attic in over 20 years. After Richard's stroke, she had moved their bedroom downstairs, and the upper floors had gradually become places she simply didn't go. Too many stairs. Too many memories. Too much dust and silence. The attic especially held too much of the past. When she and Richard had first moved in, full of hope and plans for the future, they had stored everything they didn't immediately need up there. Boxes of wedding gifts still in their wrapping. Furniture from his parents' house. Books they meant to read someday. And, in the far corner, covered with a sheet, the crib they had bought the year she turned 30. The year they had started trying for a baby. They never did have children. The doctors couldn't explain why. They just said sometimes these things don't work out, as if the death of a dream could be reduced to statistical probability. Martha had packed away the crib herself, climbing those narrow stairs with tears streaming down her face, and she had never gone back up. Richard had offered to get rid of it. He had offered multiple times over the years. But Martha always said no. Getting rid of it felt too final, like admitting defeat in a battle that had already been lost. So it stayed up there, gathering dust, a monument to a life that never was. Now, looking at Solomon staring up at that small window, Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "Come on," she said, shaking off the strange feeling. "Let's get you settled." She opened the passenger door, and Solomon climbed out awkwardly, his 3 legs navigating the step down with practiced care. He stood on the gravel driveway, still looking up at that attic window, before finally following Martha to the front door. The first day was quiet. Martha showed Solomon around the house, the kitchen where she would feed him, the living room where she spent most of her time, the back door that led to the small fenced yard. Solomon explored each room methodically, sniffing corners and furniture with careful attention. But every few minutes, his gaze would drift upward, toward the ceiling, as if he could see through the plaster and wood to the floors above. That night, Martha set up a bed for him, in the living room, a pile of old blankets arranged in a corner near the radiator. Solomon circled the bed 3 times before lying down, his eye following Martha as she moved around the room. "Good night, Solomon," she said, turning off the lamp. "I hope you'll be happy here." She climbed the stairs to her bedroom on the 2nd floor, her knees protesting each step. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and groans. She changed into her nightgown, took her medications, and slid beneath the cold sheets of her empty bed. The bedroom still felt like a museum of her marriage. Richard's reading glasses sat on the nightstand, exactly where he had left them 18 months ago. His robe hung on the back of the bathroom door. His slippers waited beside the bed, as if he might walk through the door at any moment and slip his feet into them like he always did. Martha hadn't been able to move any of it. At first, she told herself she was too busy with funeral arrangements and legal paperwork. Then she told herself she needed to wait until the grief wasn't so fresh. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She didn't want to erase the evidence that he had existed, that someone had shared this space with her, that she hadn't always been alone. She thought about Solomon downstairs, curled up in his new bed, another presence in the house, another heartbeat echoing through the empty rooms. It had been so long since she had shared her home with anyone that the simple fact of his existence felt almost revolutionary. What had she been thinking? Adopting a dog at her age. She could barely take care of herself most days. Her knees ached constantly, her eyesight was failing, and her memory wasn't what it used to be. Just last week she had forgotten to pay the electric bill, and the week before that she had left the stove on for hours after making tea. But something about Solomon had made her feel certain. Certain in a way she hadn't felt since Richard was alive. Maybe even since before that. The dog had looked at her like she mattered. Like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence that pressed against the walls like something alive. Tomorrow she would figure out a routine. Tomorrow she would call the vet and schedule a checkup. Tomorrow everything would start to make sense. Sleep came slowly, as it always did. But staying asleep, that proved impossible. At 2:47 a.m., Martha woke to the sound of movement, not loud but distinct, the soft thump of something climbing stairs, followed by a rhythmic clicking sound. She lay still, her heart pounding, her mind racing through possibilities. An intruder? A raccoon that had gotten in through the basement? Then she remembered. Solomon. She reached for the lamp on her nightstand and clicked it on, casting the room in weak yellow light. The sound continued. Thump, click, moving past her bedroom door and continuing upward, toward the attic. Martha pushed back the covers and stood, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. She opened her bedroom door and peered into the hallway. Empty. But the sound was clear now, coming from the narrow staircase at the end of the hall that led to the attic. She followed it. The attic stairs were steep and cramped, barely wide enough for one person. Martha hadn't climbed them in over 2 decades, and she had to grip the railing tightly to keep her balance. The wood groaned under her weight, announcing her presence to whoever, or whatever, was above. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly ajar. Pale moonlight leaked through the gap. Martha pushed it open. The attic was exactly as she remembered, cluttered with boxes and old furniture, draped in dust cloths that had turned gray with age. A single window let in the cold light of the moon, casting long shadows across the floor. And there, in the far corner, sat Solomon. The dog had positioned himself in front of a specific section of floorboards, his body rigid, his eye fixed on a spot just below the dusty wooden planks. He wasn't moving. He wasn't making a sound. He was simply sitting there, staring, as if standing guard over something precious. Solomon? Martha's voice came out as a whisper. What are you doing up here? The dog turned his head to look at her. In the moonlight, his single eye seemed to glow with an almost supernatural intensity. He let out that same low whine she had heard at the shelter, the sound of recognition, of urgency, of something trying desperately to be understood. Then he turned back to the floor and began to scratch at the boards. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. "There's nothing there, boy. Just old wood and dust." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it, because Solomon wasn't scratching randomly. He was focused on one specific board, his remaining paw working at the edge where it met its neighbor. "Come on," Martha said, her voice shakier than she intended. "Let's go back to bed. It's cold up here." Solomon didn't move. She walked toward him, her feet stirring up dust that sparkled in the moonlight like tiny stars. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his back. "Solomon, come." The dog looked up at her again, and Martha saw something in his eye that made her breath catch. Pleading. He was pleading with her. But for what? She glanced down at the floorboard he had been scratching. It looked no different from any of the others, old, worn, covered in a layer of grime that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Or had it? Martha squinted, leaning closer. In the pale light, she could see faint marks around the edge of the board. Scratches. Not fresh ones from Solomon, but older marks that had been worn smooth by time, as if someone long ago had pried this board up and put it back again. Her heart began to pound harder. "Not tonight," she said more to herself than to the dog. "Whatever this is, not tonight." She took Solomon by the collar, a new one she had bought at the pet store on the way home, simple brown leather, and gently guided him away from the corner. He resisted at first, his 3 legs bracing against the floor, but eventually he allowed himself to be led. They descended the attic stairs together, Martha's mind racing with questions she wasn't ready to answer. She brought Solomon back to his bed in the living room and sat with him for a while, stroking his scarred head until his breathing evened out and his eye finally closed. But as she climbed back into her own bed, she knew sleep wouldn't come easy, because she was starting to remember something she had spent 40 years trying to forget. The attic had been Eleanor's favorite place. The days that followed were strange and unsettling. During daylight hours, Solomon seemed like a normal dog, or as normal as a 3-legged, one-eyed rescue could be. He followed Martha around the house, watched her cook and clean, and lay at her feet while she read or watched television. He ate the food she put out for him without complaint, and did his business in the backyard with dignified efficiency. Martha found herself talking to him constantly, not in the baby voice some people used with pets, but in her regular voice, as if he were a friend she was catching up with after a long separation. "Richard used to drink his coffee black," she told Solomon one morning, as she stirred cream into her own cup. "Said adding anything to it was like apologizing for the taste. I never understood that. If you don't like the taste of something, why not make it better?" Solomon watched her from his spot near the kitchen door, his head tilted slightly, his eye attentive. "He was stubborn about the strangest things," Martha continued. "Coffee, the thermostat, which way the toilet paper should hang. But the big things, the things that really mattered, he was always willing to compromise. That's what made our marriage work, I think. We fought about the little stuff, so we never had to fight about the big stuff." She sat down at the kitchen table with her coffee and looked out the window at the gray November sky. The trees in the backyard had lost most of their leaves, their bare branches reaching upward like hands grasping at something they couldn't quite reach. "I miss him," she said quietly. "I don't say it out loud very often because what's the point? He's gone. Saying I miss him doesn't bring him back. But I do. Every single day." Solomon rose from his spot and walked over to her, his 3 legs moving with practiced coordination. He placed his head on her knee, his single eye looking up at her with something that felt remarkably like understanding. Martha put her hand on his scarred head and let herself cry. It was the first time she had cried since Richard's funeral. 18 months of bottled grief came pouring out, and Solomon stayed right there beside her, a silent witness to her pain. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer platitudes or advice. He just stayed. When the tears finally subsided, Martha felt lighter than she had in months. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer felt like a stone pressing against her chest. It felt more like a river, flowing through her and around her, carrying her forward. "Thank you," she whispered to Solomon. The dog's tail gave a single slow wag. But every night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., he climbed the stairs to the attic. Martha tried everything to stop him. She closed the door to the living room, but he somehow got it open. She blocked the attic stairs with furniture, but he navigated around it. She even considered locking him in the bathroom overnight, but the look he gave her when she suggested it, that single pleading eye, made her feel like a monster. So instead she started following him. Night after night, she would wake to the sound of his ascent and drag herself out of bed to find him in the same spot, scratching at the same floorboard, whining that same low, mournful note. And night after night, she would bring him back downstairs, telling herself that it was nothing, just a quirk of a damaged animal, a behavior that would fade with time and patience. But on the 7th night, something changed. Martha woke at her usual time, roused by the familiar sounds of Solomon's journey. But when she opened her bedroom door, she found him standing in the hallway, directly outside her room, waiting for her. "Solomon?" The dog turned and began walking toward the attic stairs. Halfway there, he stopped and looked back at her over his shoulder. He wanted her to follow. Martha's hands were trembling as she climbed those narrow stairs for the 7th time that week. She told herself it was the cold, the late hour, the disruption to her sleep. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was afraid of what she might find. Solomon was already in position when she reached the attic, sitting in his usual spot, his eye fixed on that same mysterious floorboard. But tonight, he wasn't scratching. He was simply waiting. Martha approached slowly. The moonlight was brighter tonight, a full moon casting the attic in sharp silver and black. She could see the board clearly now, could see the scratches around its edges, both old and new. She knelt down beside Solomon, her knees cracking in protest. The dog pressed against her side, warm and solid and real. "You really want me to look, don't you?" she whispered. Solomon let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh. Martha's hands were shaking as she touched the edge of the board. The wood was cold and rough beneath her fingers. She found the groove where it met its neighbor and began to pull. The board didn't budge. She tried again, applying more pressure, but years of disuse had sealed it in place. She needed something to pry it up. A crowbar, a flathead screwdriver, anything with leverage. "Tomorrow," she told Solomon, her voice unsteady. "I'll get the right tools tomorrow and we'll see what's under there, okay?" The dog looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet and walked toward the stairs. He was trusting her. He was giving her one more night. But as Martha followed him down from the attic, she realized that tomorrow might bring answers she had been avoiding her entire adult life. Because she was starting to remember why she had stopped going up to the attic in the first place. It had been Eleanor's space, her sanctuary, the place she went when the world became too much, when their parents' arguments grew too loud, when the weight of being the responsible older sister crushed her beneath its demands. Martha had been 15 when Eleanor was 17. She remembered standing at the bottom of those steep stairs, calling up to her sister, asking if she could come up too, and Eleanor's voice floating down, gentle but firm. "Not now, Marty. I need to be alone." She had always needed to be alone. Their parents had fought about it constantly. Their father thought Eleanor was being dramatic, seeking attention, making herself seem more important than she was. Their mother defended her, though even she didn't seem to fully understand what was happening. "She's sensitive," their mother would say, her voice sharp with warning. "Some people feel things more deeply than others. We need to give her space." But Martha had seen something else in her sister. Not just sensitivity, not just a need for solitude. There was something haunted in Eleanor's eyes, a knowledge that didn't belong to a 17-year-old girl, a weight that seemed to press down on her from somewhere beyond the visible world. The last time Martha had climbed those attic stairs was 2 weeks before Eleanor disappeared. She had snuck up in the middle of the night, driven by teenage curiosity and a longing to understand her sister better. She had found Eleanor sitting in the corner, surrounded by candles, writing furiously in a journal she hid whenever anyone came near. "Marty!" Eleanor had jumped up, quickly closing the journal. "What are you doing up here?" "I couldn't sleep," Martha had said. "I heard you moving around. I just wanted to see if you were okay." Eleanor's face had softened then, the fear replaced by something like love. She had crossed the attic and pulled Martha into a hug, tight, almost desperate. "I'm okay," she had whispered. "I just need to do something important, something I can't explain yet. But someday, Marty, someday you'll understand." Those were almost the last words Eleanor ever spoke to her. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Until the night she left and never came back. Martha slept fitfully for what remained of the night. In her dreams, she was young again, a teenager standing in the doorway of the room she and Eleanor had shared. Her sister was packing a small bag, moving with a quiet urgency that Martha didn't understand. "Where are you going?" Dream Martha asked. Eleanor turned and smiled, but it was a sad smile, weighted with something Martha couldn't name. "Somewhere I should have gone a long time ago." "Can I come with you?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not this time, Marty, but I'll leave you a message, when you're ready to find it." "When will I be ready?" But Eleanor was already fading, dissolving into shadows, her autumn-colored hair the last thing to disappear. "When he brings you to it," her voice echoed, "when the broken one shows you the way." Martha woke with tears on her cheeks and the first light of dawn creeping through her bedroom window. She didn't eat breakfast. She went straight to the garage. Richard had been a meticulous man, and his tools were still arranged on the pegboard exactly as he had left them. Martha found a flathead screwdriver, a small pry bar, and a flashlight. Her hands steadied as she gathered them, a strange calm settling over her. Whatever was under that floorboard, she needed to know. Solomon was waiting for her at the bottom of the attic stairs. He had been sitting there since she woke up, as if he knew today would be different. "Okay, boy," Martha said. "Let's find out what you've been trying to tell me." They climbed the stairs together, Martha in front, Solomon following close behind. The attic looked different in daylight, dustier, more cluttered, less mysterious. But the corner where Solomon had been keeping vigil still held a strange gravity, drawing Martha's eye the moment she entered. She crossed to the floorboard and knelt down, setting her tools beside her. Solomon settled a few feet away, watching intently. Martha wedged the screwdriver into the gap between the boards. The wood resisted at first, groaning in protest, but with steady pressure it began to give. She worked the pry bar in beside the screwdriver and pushed down. With a crack that echoed through the attic, the board came loose. Martha set it aside, her heart hammering. She picked up the flashlight and aimed it into the dark space beneath the floor. At first, she saw only joists and dust, the bones of the old house, undisturbed for decades. But then the beam caught something else, something that didn't belong. A metal box. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of tin, its surface dull with age but free of rust. Martha reached in with trembling hands and lifted it out. It was lighter than she expected, and something inside shifted with a soft whisper. Paper. She set the box on the attic floor and stared at it for a long moment. Solomon moved closer, pressing his nose against its side, then looking up at Martha with that knowing eye. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The dog gave a soft whine. Martha took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. For Martha, when you're finally ready. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor. Martha's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the envelope. She hadn't seen her sister's handwriting in 40 years, but she would have recognized it anywhere. The distinctive loops, the slight leftward slant, the way she dotted her eyes with tiny circles instead of points. This was real. This was Eleanor's. She had left something behind after all. Martha opened the envelope carefully, terrified of damaging whatever was inside. She pulled out several sheets of paper, folded together, covered in that familiar handwriting. The first page was dated October 14th, 1983, 3 days before Eleanor disappeared. She began to read. "Dear Marty, if you're reading this, then something has finally led you to look beneath the floorboards. I always wondered what it would be. Curiosity, loneliness, or maybe just the old house settling in a way that caught your attention. I never imagined it would be a dog. But then again, I never imagined a lot of things. I need you to know, first and foremost, that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. I'm sorry for all the years of silence. I'm sorry for making you believe that I abandoned you, that I simply walked away from our family without a second thought. The truth is so much more complicated than that, Marty, and I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it. Maybe you're still not ready, but I've kept this secret for too long already, and I can feel my time running out. So I'm going to tell you everything, and I'm going to trust that you'll understand. Or at least, that you'll try. Do you remember when Mama got sick? The summer you turned 14? The doctor said it was her nerves, but you and I both knew it was something more. She started seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices none of us could hear. Papa tried to hide it from the neighbors, from the church, from everyone. Mental illness wasn't something people talked about back then. It was a shame to be buried, not a disease to be treated. What you don't know, what I never told you, is that I started showing the same symptoms that year." Martha's breath caught. She read the sentence again, then again, trying to make it make sense. It started small. Shadows in my peripheral vision. Sounds that came from empty rooms. I told myself it was stress, that I was worried about Mama, that I was imagining things. But then the dreams started. Vivid, terrible dreams about things I couldn't possibly know. Events that hadn't happened yet. Conversations between people I'd never met. And when those dreams started coming true, I knew something was very wrong. I was terrified, Marty. Terrified of becoming like Mama, locked in her room, whispering to things that weren't there. Terrified that Papa would look at me with that same mixture of shame and disgust. Terrified that you would stop seeing me as your big sister and start seeing me as something to be feared. So I hid it. For years, I hid it. The attic became my refuge. The only place where I could let the visions come without anyone watching, without anyone knowing. I filled journals with the things I saw, trying to make sense of them, trying to find a pattern. Some of what I wrote was nonsense, but some of it Some of it was terrifyingly accurate. In the summer of 1982, I had a vision that changed everything. I saw a man, a doctor, who specialized in cases like mine. He wasn't like the others who wanted to lock people away and forget about them. He believed that what people like Mama and I experienced wasn't madness at all. It was something else. Something that science hadn't figured out how to explain yet. His name was Dr. Samuel Whitmore, and he ran a small research facility in Vermont. I wrote to him, describing my symptoms, expecting to be dismissed or reported. Instead, he wrote back. He said he wanted to meet me. He said he could help. But there was a condition. The work he did was controversial. His funding came from private sources, people who didn't want their involvement known. If I came to him, I would have to leave my old life behind completely. No contact with family or friends, no trace of where I had gone. I agonized over that decision for months. How could I leave you, Marty? You were the person I loved most in the world. The thought of never seeing you again was almost enough to make me stay, to resign myself to whatever fate awaited me. But then I had another vision, the clearest one I ever had. I saw you, Marty, not as you were then, a teenager with pigtails and skinned knees, but as you would be, an older woman alone in a big empty house, grieving losses I couldn't prevent. I saw the sadness that would settle into your bones like a permanent winter. I saw the walls you would build around your heart. And I saw something else. I saw myself, staying. I saw what would happen if I didn't leave, if I let the visions consume me the way they consumed Mama. I saw myself becoming a burden to you, a chain around your neck, a shadow that darkened every room you entered. I saw you sacrificing your own life to take care of mine, the way you had already started taking care of Mama. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't be the thing that kept you from living. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to leave, not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to stay. The pages trembled in Martha's hands. Tears were streaming down her face now, falling onto the paper, smudging words that had waited 40 years to be read. I know this must seem impossible to believe. Visions, prophecies. It sounds like the ravings of a mad woman. Maybe that's exactly what it is. Maybe Dr. Whitmore's research led nowhere, and I sacrificed everything for nothing. But there's one thing. I know for certain, Marty. One thing that tells me the visions were real. I saw the dog. Years before I left, in one of my earliest clear visions, I saw you as an old woman, kneeling on the floor of our attic. You were crying, but not from sadness, from something closer to wonder. And beside you sat a dog unlike any I had ever seen. Missing an eye, missing a leg, but looking at you with more love and understanding than most humans could muster. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I thought maybe it was symbolic, the broken creature who would lead you to wholeness. But now, as I write this letter, I think I understand. The dog is the key. Somehow, some way, he will be the one who brings you here. He will be the bridge between us, across time and silence and all the years we've lost. I don't know how. I don't know why. But I trust the vision. I have to. So I'm leaving this letter here, beneath the floorboards of the only place that ever felt truly mine. And I'm trusting that when you're finally ready, when life has broken you enough to make you soft and healed you enough to make you strong, the dog will come. And you'll finally know the truth. Martha set down the pages. She couldn't see through her tears anymore. The attic had blurred into a watercolor of shadows and light, and Solomon was pressing against her, his warm body the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unmoored. Eleanor had seen him. 40 years ago, her sister had seen this exact moment, Martha, alone and grieving, kneeling on dusty floorboards with a broken dog beside her. It was impossible. It was insane. And yet the letter was here. The dog was here. She was here. She picked up the remaining pages, wiping her eyes, forcing herself to continue. There's more I need to tell you. Things about our family that Papa never wanted you to know. The visions didn't start with Mama. They started with her mother, our grandmother, the one who died before we were born. And before her, it was her mother too. There's something in our blood, Marty. Something that passes from mother to daughter, skipping generations sometimes, but never disappearing entirely. You never showed any signs of it. I checked, believe me. I watched you for years, looking for any hint of what Mama and I experienced. But you were always so grounded, so practical, so firmly rooted in the real world. I used to envy that about you. The way you could look at a situation and see exactly what it was, without shadows or echoes or visions of what it might become. That's why I knew you would be okay without me, because you didn't need to see the future to navigate it. You had something better, the ability to face whatever came, head on, without fear. I hope I was right about that. I hope you've had a good life, Marty. I hope you found someone who loved you the way you deserved to be loved. I hope you filled that old house with laughter and warmth and all the things we never had growing up. And if you didn't, if life has been harder than either of us imagined, then I hope you can forgive me. For leaving, for not being there, for choosing to save myself instead of staying to save you. I was so young. We both were, and I did the best I could with what I knew. The letter continued for several more pages, Eleanor's handwriting becoming more rushed, more urgent, as if she was racing against time. She wrote about Dr. Whitmore's research, about the community of people she found who shared her abilities. She wrote about learning to control the visions instead of being controlled by them, about the peace she finally found after years of fear. She wrote about meeting someone, a man named Thomas, who understood her in ways no one else ever had. And she wrote about a daughter. I named her Martha after you. I call her Marty for short. She has your eyes, Marty, our mother's eyes, dark and deep and full of questions. And she has the gift too. But for her, it's different. It's gentler. Dr. Whitmore says the ability is evolving, becoming easier to bear with each generation. Maybe someday it won't be a curse at all. I wish you could meet her. I wish I could bring her to see the aunt she's named after, the person I told her stories about every night before bed. But the rules haven't changed. The work is still secret, still protected. And I made a promise. But maybe someday. Maybe when she's older. Maybe when the world is ready. The letter ended there, mid-thought, as if Eleanor had been interrupted or had simply run out of time. But there was one more page. A separate sheet, folded smaller than the rest, tucked into the back of the envelope. The handwriting on this one was different, shakier, less certain. Martha unfolded it and saw the date at the top. March 3rd, 2019. Just 6 years ago. Marty, if you're reading this, then you found my first letter. I always knew you would, eventually. I came back once, just once, in the dead of night, when I knew the house would be empty. Your husband was in the hospital. I'm sorry about that, by the way. I saw it coming, but couldn't warn you. I climbed those familiar attic stairs and added this page to what I had already written. I needed you to know that I'm still here. Still alive. Still thinking about you every single day. The research continued, evolved, grew beyond anything we imagined. Little Marty is grown now, with children of her own. She became a doctor, if you can believe it, a real one, not like Dr. Whitmore with his fringe theories. She helps people in ways I never could. And she knows about you. She's always known. I thought about coming back for real so many times. After Papa died, after Mama finally passed, after your husband got sick. Every time you faced something hard alone, I felt it, not through visions, but through the bond that connected us since before we were born. I wanted to knock on your door and tell you everything. I wanted to hold you the way I used to when we were girls, when the storms scared you and I would climb into your bed and promise that nothing bad could ever happen as long as we were together. But I was afraid. Afraid you would hate me for leaving. Afraid you would reject me for coming back. Afraid that after 40 years of silence, there would be nothing left between us but ashes. So I stayed away, and I watched from a distance. And I added this letter to my hiding spot, hoping that someday something would bring you here. I don't know how much longer I have. The visions have become harder to bear as I've gotten older, and my body is tired in ways that medicine can't fix. But I wanted you to have a way to find me, if you wanted to. There's a phone number at the bottom of this page. It belongs to my daughter, your niece. If you call it, she'll know what to do. But only if you want to, Marty. Only if you're ready. I won't blame you if you burn these letters and pretend you never found them. I won't blame you if you decide that some doors are better left closed. But I hope you don't. I hope that after all these years you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I hope that before I leave this world, I can see your face one more time. I love you, Marty. I never stopped. Your sister, Eleanor. At the bottom of the page, written in careful numbers, was a phone number with a Vermont area code. Martha sat in the attic for a long time after finishing the letter. The sun climbed higher, sending shafts of light through the dusty window, illuminating motes that swirled like tiny galaxies in the air. Solomon lay beside her, his head resting on her thigh, his eye closed in peaceful rest. She didn't know what to feel. The emotions were too big, too tangled, too raw to be sorted into neat categories. Grief for the years they had lost, anger at the secrets that had been kept, wonder at the impossibility of what Eleanor had described, and beneath it all, something that felt dangerously like hope. Her sister was alive. Eleanor hadn't abandoned her. She had been protecting her, in her own strange, impossible way. And somewhere in Vermont, there was a niece, a family, waiting to be found. Martha looked down at Solomon. The dog opened his eye and met her gaze. "You knew," she whispered. "Somehow, you knew to bring me here." Solomon's tail thumped once against the dusty floor. How? How could you possibly know about a letter hidden 40 years ago in a house you'd never been in? The dog had no answers. He simply looked at her with that deep, knowing eye, full of love and patience, and something that might have been understanding. Maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe there were things in this world that science couldn't explain. Maybe the broken ones, the creatures that everyone else had given up on, were exactly the ones capable of leading people to the truths they most needed to find. Martha carefully gathered the letters and returned them to the metal box. She would read them again, many times, poring over every word until she had memorized them completely. But right now, she needed to move. She needed to do something with the earthquake that was happening inside her chest. She stood, her knees protesting, and picked up the phone number written in her sister's hand. Then she walked down the attic stairs for the last time. The days that followed were the strangest of Martha's life. She didn't call the number right away. She couldn't. The magnitude of what she had discovered needed time to settle, like sediment drifting to the bottom of a stirred pond. Instead, she talked to Solomon. It started simply enough, narrating her daily activities the way some people do with pets. "I'm making tea now," she would say. "Earl Grey, like I always have in the afternoon." Or, "I'm going to watch the news, but I'll probably fall asleep before it's over." But gradually the conversations deepened. She found herself telling Solomon about Eleanor, the real Eleanor, the sister she remembered from childhood. The way she used to braid Martha's hair before school. the songs she would sing to help her fall asleep, the fierce, protective look she got whenever anyone tried to hurt her little sister. She told him about the day Eleanor disappeared, how Martha had woken up to find her sister's bed empty, her closet cleared of a few essential items, her favorite books gone from the shelf, how their father had raged and their mother had wept, and the police had searched for weeks without finding a single trace. She told him about the years that followed, the way the family had fractured under the weight of the mystery, how their father had become cold and distant, convinced that Eleanor had run off with some man and shamed them all, how their mother's mental state had deteriorated until she could no longer distinguish between memories and hallucinations, how Martha had been left to pick up the pieces, to take care of everyone, to bury her own grief so deep that she almost forgot it was there. And she told him about Richard, how they had met at a church social when she was 25, how he had made her laugh for the first time in years, how she had married him not out of passionate love, but out of desperate need for something stable, something real, something that wouldn't disappear in the middle of the night. Solomon listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt or judge or offer unwanted advice. He simply sat beside her, his warm body pressed against her leg, his single eye fixed on her face with an attention that felt almost human. And slowly, through the telling, Martha began to heal. On the 10th day after finding the letter, she finally picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the Vermont number. Part of her expected it to be disconnected. 40 years was a long time, and even 6 years since Eleanor's last note was enough for everything to change. But on the 3rd ring, someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was female, warm, with a slight accent Martha couldn't place. Martha's throat closed. She tried to speak, but no words came out. "Hello? Is someone there?" Martha forced the word out. I'm calling about... My name is Martha. Martha Reeves. I found a letter..." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. Then the voice came back, and this time it was trembling. "Aunt Martha?" The word hit her like a physical force. Aunt. She had never been called that in her entire life. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm Martha, and I think your mother is my sister." The sound that came through the phone might have been a laugh or a sob, probably both. "Oh my God, oh my God. She always said, she always believed, but we thought..." The woman took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My name is Martha, too. Marty. Mom named me after you." Martha's tears were flowing freely now, dripping onto the phone, onto her hand, onto the floor at her feet. "She wrote about you," Martha managed. "In the letter, she said you have my eyes." "I do," Marty said, and now she was definitely crying. "That's what everyone tells me. Grandma's eyes, they say. But Mom always called them your eyes." Is Eleanor... She's alive." The words came quickly, urgently. "She's alive, Aunt Martha. She's not well. Her health has been declining for years now. But she's still here. And she talks about you every single day." Martha sank into a chair, unable to support her own weight. Solomon was there immediately, pressing against her legs, whining softly. Is it possible to... "She wants to see you," Marty said. "She's wanted to see you for 40 years. We just didn't think... We weren't sure you'd ever find the letter. We weren't sure you'd want to." "I want to," Martha said. "God, I want to more than anything." They talked for 2 hours. Marty told Martha about her mother's life, the research facility that had become a home, the community that had become a family, the daughter and grandchildren that Eleanor loved with the same fierce devotion she had once shown to her little sister. She told her about Eleanor's health, which had been deteriorating for the past few years. The visions were taking their toll, she explained. They always did, eventually. Marty's voice was warm and open, carrying the cadence of someone who had grown up surrounded by love. She told Martha about growing up knowing she had an aunt she would probably never meet, about the stories Eleanor had told her, stories of two girls sharing a bedroom, braiding each other's hair, promising to be best friends forever. She talked about you every day, Marty said. Your favorite color, your favorite food, the way you used to sing in the shower when you thought no one was listening. She remembered everything, Aunt Martha. Everything. Martha clutched the phone tighter, tears streaming down her face. All those years, she had wondered. All those years she had imagined her sister forgetting her, moving on, building a new life where Martha didn't exist. But Eleanor had carried her the whole time, just as Martha had carried Eleanor. There's something else you should know, Marty said, her voice softening. Mom kept a journal. She's been writing in it since she came to the facility. Decades of entries, thousands of pages, and a lot of those pages are about you. About me? About her visions of you. Your whole life, Aunt Martha. She saw it. She saw your wedding day. She saw the year you tried to have children and couldn't. She saw your husband's illness and his death. She saw everything. Martha's throat tightened. Why didn't she come back? If she could see all that, why didn't she come help? The silence on the other end of the line stretched painfully. When Marty spoke again, her voice was heavy with something that sounded like the accumulated sorrow of 40 years. Because she saw what would happen if she did. She saw the two possible futures, one where she stayed away and one where she came back. And in the future where she came back, it was worse, for both of you. She never told me the details, but she said the choice nearly destroyed her. Martha closed her eyes. She didn't want to believe it. She wanted to be angry, to rage against the sister who had abandoned her. But somehow, deep in her heart, she understood. Eleanor had made the impossible choice. She had chosen to break her own heart to protect her sister. It was the most Eleanor thing in the world. But she was still lucid, still aware, still hoping every single day that Martha would find the letter and make the call. She's going to be so happy, Marty said, her voice thick with emotion. She's going to be so incredibly happy. When can I see her? Martha asked. As soon as you can get here. I'll send you the address. It's a small town in Vermont. Kind of hard to find, but I'll give you detailed directions. Martha looked down at Solomon, who had not left her side throughout the entire conversation. I have a dog now, she said. A rescue. I can't leave him alone. Bring him, Marty said without hesitation. Mom will want to meet him. She always said, well, you'll understand when you see her. She always said he would be special. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. She knew about him, even before I adopted him? The silence on the other end was answer enough. Just come, Marty said softly. Come and see her. Everything will make sense then. 3 days later, Martha loaded Solomon into the passenger seat of her car and began the drive to Vermont. She had spent those 3 days preparing, packing a bag, arranging for a neighbor to check on the house, reading Eleanor's letters over and over until she could recite them from memory. She had also done something she hadn't done in years. She had looked at old photographs. In the back of her closet, in a box she had avoided opening since Richard's death, were the albums from her childhood. Pictures of her and Eleanor as girls, playing in the backyard, dressed up for Easter, posing reluctantly for school portraits. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and summer vacations at the lake. Martha had studied her sister's face in those photographs, looking for signs of the burden Eleanor had carried. And now that she knew what to look for, she could see it. The distant look in Eleanor's eyes. The way her smile never quite reached her full expression. The slight tension in her shoulders, as if she was always bracing for something only she could see. How had she missed it? How had she lived beside her sister for 17 years and never noticed that Eleanor was drowning? The answer, Martha knew, was that she hadn't wanted to see. She had been a child, wrapped up in her own small concerns, trusting that the adults around her had everything under control. And Eleanor had protected her from the truth, shielding her little sister from the chaos of their mother's illness and the weight of her own emerging gift. It was a lot to carry alone. Too much, really. But she wasn't alone anymore. The drive to Vermont took 9 hours. Solomon slept for most of it, occasionally waking to look out the window at the changing landscape, the suburbs giving way to farmland, the farmland giving way to mountains, the mountains giving way to forests so thick and green they seemed almost primeval. As they crossed into Vermont, Martha felt the years falling away. She was no longer a 62-year-old widow with a bad knee and a lonely heart. She was 15 again, waiting for her sister to come down from the attic, hoping that today would be the day Eleanor finally let her in on the secret. Today, she would finally know. The town was small, barely more than a main street with a handful of shops, a white church steeple rising above the trees. Martha followed the directions Marty had given her, turning off the main road onto a winding gravel path that led deeper into the forest. After 20 minutes of driving, she began to wonder if she was lost. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches intertwining overhead to form a green tunnel. No signs, no markers, no indication that civilization existed anywhere nearby. Then the forest opened up, and she saw it. The compound, if you could call it that, was not what Martha had expected. Instead of the clinical, institutional building she had imagined, there was a cluster of cottages arranged around a central garden. Flowers bloomed in profusion despite the autumn chill. People moved between the buildings, some in casual clothes, some in white coats, all with an air of peaceful purpose. It looked more like a retreat than a research facility, more like a place people came to heal than a place they came to be studied. Martha noticed that several of the people walking between buildings had dogs with them, not service dogs in official vests, but companions, animals that seemed to move with the same quiet purpose as their human counterparts. One woman sat on a bench near the garden, a gray cat curled in her lap, her eyes closed as if in meditation. There was something about this place that felt different from anywhere Martha had ever been. The air itself seemed charged with a kind of energy, not threatening, but alive. Present, awake in a way that the rest of the world wasn't. She wondered if this was what Eleanor had felt all those years ago when she first arrived, the sense of finally being somewhere that made sense. Martha parked her car in a small lot near the entrance and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Solomon was awake now, his nose pressed against the window, his tail wagging slowly. "This is it, boy," she said. "This is where Eleanor's been all these years." A woman emerged from the nearest cottage, middle-aged, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that made Martha's breath catch. Her eyes, Eleanor's eyes, the eyes that had looked out at her from photographs for 40 years. Marty. Martha opened the car door and stepped out on shaky legs. The woman was walking toward her, moving faster now, almost running. "Aunt Martha?" "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. And then Marty was embracing her, holding her tight, sobbing against her shoulder. "You came. You really came." Martha hugged her back, this stranger who was also family, this piece of Eleanor that had existed all along without her knowing. "I had to," she said. "I had to see her." Marty pulled back, wiping her eyes. "She's in the main cottage. She's been waiting all morning. She didn't sleep last night. She was too excited." Martha opened the passenger door to let Solomon out. The dog climbed down carefully, his 3 legs navigating the step with practiced ease. He stood beside Martha, looking up at Marty with that intelligent single eye. Marty stared at him. "Oh," she breathed. "It's him." "You've seen him before?" "In photos. Mom drew pictures of him years ago before she ever saw a photograph. She knew exactly what he would look like. The missing eye, the missing leg, everything." She shook her head in wonder. "She said he would be the one to bring you to her." Martha looked down at Solomon, her heart full to bursting. The broken dog, the impossible messenger, the bridge across 40 years of silence. "Let's go see your mother," she said. Eleanor's cottage was bright and warm, filled with plants and books and the accumulated treasures of a lifetime. Martha stepped through the door and felt immediately that she was entering sacred space, a place where someone had lived fully and deeply and without regret. And there, sitting in a chair by the window, was her sister. Eleanor was 81 years old now. Her autumn-colored hair had turned to silver. Her face was lined with decades of laughter and tears, and her body was thin in a way that spoke of illness. But her eyes were exactly the same as they had been in Martha's memories, deep and dark and full of questions, full of secrets, full of love. "Marty," Eleanor whispered, "you came." Martha crossed the room in what felt like a single step. She fell to her knees beside her sister's chair, taking Eleanor's fragile hands in her own. "I came," she said through her tears. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry it took so long." "No." Eleanor's voice was weak but firm. "Don't apologize. You came exactly when you were supposed to, exactly when I saw you coming." She looked past Martha's shoulder to where Solomon stood in the doorway. A smile spread across her face, the same smile Martha remembered from childhood, only now it reached her eyes. "And you brought him, the broken one, the one who sees what we cannot." Solomon limped forward, approaching Eleanor with the same careful respect he had shown Martha on the day they met. He stopped beside her chair, looking up at her with his single eye, and let out a low, mournful whine. The same sound he had made in the shelter, the sound of recognition. Eleanor reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his scarred head. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing her home." The days that followed were filled with stories. Eleanor told Martha everything, every vision she had ever had, every choice she had made, every moment she had thought of her little sister, and wished things could have been different. She explained the research that had consumed her life's work, the breakthroughs and the failures, the community of gifted individuals who had become her family. And Martha told Eleanor about her life, the marriage that had been solid if not passionate, the children they had never had, the empty house that had grown emptier after Richard died. She told her about the grief she had carried for 40 years, the anger that had eventually softened into resignation, the loneliness that had become so familiar she had almost stopped noticing it. They cried together. They laughed together. They held hands like they used to when they were girls, when Eleanor would climb into Martha's bed during storms and promise that nothing bad could ever happen as long as they were together. And they talked about Solomon. "I don't understand," Martha said one afternoon, as the 3 of them sat in Eleanor's garden. "How did you know about him? How could you possibly have seen a dog that wouldn't exist for decades?" Eleanor smiled. "The visions don't follow time the way we do. They show what will be, what might be, what needs to be. I saw you finding him years before he was born. I saw him leading you to the attic. I saw us sitting here in this garden having this exact conversation." She paused, her eyes distant. "And I saw him coming to me first." Martha frowned. "What do you mean?" "The dog you call Solomon. He wasn't always a stray, Marty. He had a home once, a family. He lived on a farm in Connecticut, about 20 miles from the shelter where you found him. How do you know that? Eleanor's smile turned sad. Because I saw it. In my visions, I saw his whole life, the family that loved him, the accident that took his eye, the fire that took his leg and his home. I saw him wandering the roads afterward, lost and broken, looking for something he couldn't name. She reached out and stroked Solomon's head. He was looking for you, Marty. He just didn't know it yet. But how did he end up at that shelter? How did he know to wait for me? He didn't know, not consciously. But there's something in some creatures, some dogs, some people, that connects them to the currents of time. They feel the pull of where they're supposed to be, even if they don't understand it. Solomon felt the pull. He let it guide him, and eventually, it brought him to you. Martha looked at the dog lying peacefully at her feet. All those times he had been returned to the shelter, all those families that hadn't worked out. He had been waiting for her, holding out for the person he was meant to find. That's impossible, she whispered. Maybe, Eleanor said. Or maybe impossible is just a word we use for things we don't understand yet. Martha stayed in Vermont for 3 weeks. She met the other residents of the community, men and women with gifts like Eleanor's, some stronger, some weaker, all finding refuge in this strange, peaceful place. She met Eleanor's grandchildren, bright-eyed kids who called her Great-Aunt Marty and showed her their drawings and told her stories about their grandmother's magic. And she spent hours upon hours with Eleanor, making up for lost time, building new memories to replace the ones they had been denied. But even as those weeks passed, Martha could see the truth that Marty had warned her about. Eleanor was fading. The visions that had guided her entire life were taking their final toll, draining her strength, pulling her toward something beyond. I'm not afraid, Eleanor told her one evening, as they watched the sunset from her cottage window. I've seen what comes next. It's beautiful, Marty. More beautiful than anything in this world. I'm not ready to lose you again, Martha said, her voice breaking. You won't. Eleanor squeezed her hand. I'll be with you always, just like I always have been, even when you didn't know it. That's what love does. It transcends everything. Time, distance, even death. She turned to look at Solomon, who was sleeping in a patch of fading sunlight. And you'll have him. He's got years left in him yet. Years to keep you company, to remind you that miracles are real. Martha nodded, unable to speak. Promise me something, Eleanor said. Anything. Don't go back to being alone. Don't close yourself off again. The world is full of broken things that need love. Dogs, people, places. Open your heart to them. Let them in. Let them teach you what I learned too late. That the only thing worse than being broken is being broken alone. Martha promised. 2 weeks later, Eleanor passed away in her sleep. Martha was holding her hand when it happened. One moment her sister was there, breathing softly, her face peaceful, her fingers wrapped around Martha's. The next moment she was gone. But not entirely gone. In the seconds after Eleanor's last breath, Solomon lifted his head and let out a single sound. Not a bark, not a whine, but something in between. A note of farewell, of acknowledgement, of something passing from one world to the next. And Martha could have sworn she felt it too. A warmth passing through her, a whisper of love, a promise that would outlast time itself. Goodbye, Eleanor, she whispered. I love you. Somewhere, in the space between worlds, she knew her sister heard her. Martha returned home a different person. The house on Maple Street no longer felt empty. It felt full of memories, full of purpose, full of the work she had left to do. She cleaned out the attic completely, turning it into a bright, airy space that caught the morning light. She donated the old crib to a young couple in town who were expecting their first child. She sorted through decades of accumulated belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The process took weeks, and it was both exhausting and liberating. With each box she opened, each item she touched, she felt like she was having a conversation with her past. Some things made her laugh. The ridiculous bridesmaid dress from a friend's wedding in the 1970s, the collection of ceramic frogs Richard had inexplicably started, and she had inexplicably continued. Some things made her cry. The wedding album with its faded photographs, the sympathy cards that had arrived after Richard's death and that she had never been able to throw away. But through it all, Solomon was beside her. He would lie in the doorway of whatever room she was working in, watching her with that patient eye, occasionally thumping his tail when she looked his way. When she cried, he would come and press against her leg. When she laughed, his ears would perk up as if sharing the joke. She planted flowers in the garden, the way Eleanor had done at the compound. She started with lavender, because it had been her mother's favorite. Then she added roses, petunias, marigolds, a riot of color that transformed the neglected space into something beautiful. The neighbors noticed the change. They started stopping by more often, bringing cookies and casseroles, asking how she was doing. Martha realized that she had been isolating herself for years, retreating into her grief, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. Now, slowly, she was letting the world back in. She started volunteering at the shelter where she had found Solomon, helping other broken animals find their way to homes. The staff welcomed her with open arms, remembering the quiet woman who had adopted their most challenging resident. They gave her a simple job at first, socializing the shy dogs, getting them used to human contact so they would have a better chance of being adopted. Martha excelled at it. She had a patience that the younger volunteers lacked, a willingness to sit quietly with a frightened animal for as long as it took. She would bring a book to the shelter and read aloud to the scared dogs, letting them get used to the sound of a calm human voice. She would offer treats with no strings attached, asking for nothing in return. And slowly, inevitably, the dogs would begin to trust her. "You have a gift," Casey told her one day, watching as Martha coaxed a terrified pit bull mix out from under a bench. "Some people just know how to talk to animals." Martha smiled. "I think it's more that I know how to listen." She thought about Eleanor often during those hours at the shelter. Her sister had spent her life listening to things other people couldn't hear. Visions, premonitions, messages from somewhere beyond the ordinary world. Maybe Martha's gift was simpler, but no less important. She could hear the fear in a trembling dog. She could hear the hope in a wagging tail. She could hear the silent plea for kindness that every abandoned creature carried. It wasn't magic. It was just attention, just presence, just the willingness to see another being for who they really were, not who you wanted them to be. And she stayed in touch with her new family. Marty and the grandchildren visited several times a year. Martha drove up to Vermont for holidays, for birthdays, for no reason at all except to be together. She was no longer alone in the world. She had people who knew her, who loved her, who understood the strange path that had brought them all together. But her closest companion remained Solomon. The dog never climbed the attic stairs again after that last night, the night before they left for Vermont. He seemed to know that his work was done, that he had led Martha where she needed to go, and now his job was simply to be with her. And be with her he did. Every morning he greeted her with that single knowing eye. Every evening he lay at her feet while she read or watched television or talked to him about her day. Every night he slept beside her bed, his presence a comfort that never grew old. He was her miracle, her impossible, broken, beautiful miracle. And when visitors asked about him, as they often did, drawn by his unusual appearance and gentle demeanor, Martha would smile and tell them his story. The shelter that had given up on him, the family that had found each other because of him, the sister who had seen him coming 40 years before he was born. Most people didn't believe it. They would laugh politely and assume she was being poetic, or that age was making her fanciful. But some people, rare few, would look into Solomon's eye and understand. There were things in this world that couldn't be explained, broken creatures that carried wisdom in their scars, bonds that transcended time and reason, love that found a way, no matter how impossible the path. Solomon was proof of all of it, and Martha was grateful every single day that she had walked into that shelter on a cold November morning and let herself be found. Years passed. Solomon aged, as all living things must. His muzzle turned gray, his steps grew slower, his one good eye began to cloud with the milky film of cataracts, but his spirit remained undiminished, gentle, wise, patient, loving. Martha watched him age with a mixture of gratitude and grief. Every morning when he rose stiffly from his bed, every evening when he needed help climbing onto the couch, every night when his breathing grew more labored, she noticed. She stored each moment away, adding to the treasure chest of memories she was building against the inevitable day when memories would be all she had left. They developed rituals, as all close companions do, morning walks around the garden, shorter now than they used to be, with frequent stops for Solomon to catch his breath. Afternoon naps in the sunroom, Martha reading while Solomon dreamed his old dog dreams. Evening meals shared in companionable silence, her at the table, him in his spot by the kitchen door. She told him stories during these quiet times. Stories about Eleanor and their childhood. Stories about Richard and their years together. Stories about the shelter and the dogs she had helped find homes. Solomon would listen with his head resting on his paws, his eye half closed, his tail occasionally thumping against the floor when she said something that pleased him. "You know what I've learned?" she asked him one evening, as the sun set behind the mountains. "I've learned that love doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't run out or wear out or fade away. It just changes form. Richard's love is still here. I feel it every time I remember the way he laughed, the way he held me, the way he always knew when I needed tea instead of coffee. And Eleanor's love is still here too, in the letter she left me, in the family she gave me, in the 40 years she spent watching over me from a distance." She reached down and stroked Solomon's head. "And your love will still be here too, long after you're gone. Because that's what love does. It becomes part of you. It weaves itself into your DNA, your soul, your very being. And even when the person or animal who gave it to you is no longer there, the love remains. Forever." Solomon's tail thumped once, twice, 3 times. Martha smiled through her tears. "Good boy," she whispered. "That's exactly right." Martha knew their time together was finite. She had known it from the beginning, the way anyone who loves a dog must know it. But she didn't dread the ending. She had learned, through Eleanor, that endings were not truly endings. They were transformations, passages from one form of love to another. On the day Solomon finally laid down his head and didn't rise again, Martha was with him. She had brought him to his favorite spot in the garden, where the morning sun fell warm and golden across the grass. She sat beside him, stroking his scarred head, telling him all the things she wanted him to know. "You were my miracle," she whispered. "You found me when I was lost. You led me to Eleanor. You showed me that broken things can still be beautiful." Solomon's eye flickered open one last time. He looked at her with all the love he had ever felt. all the love that had guided him across miles and years to her side. Then, with a soft sigh, he was gone. Martha sat with him for a long time afterward. The sun moved across the sky, the birds sang in the trees. The world continued on, indifferent to the small, profound loss happening in one old woman's garden. But Martha didn't feel alone. She felt Eleanor beside her, the way she had felt her since that day in Vermont. She felt Richard, too, and her mother, and all the people and animals she had loved and lost over the years. They were with her, not in any way she could see or touch, but in a way that mattered far more. They were in her heart. And Solomon was there now, too. She buried him beneath the old oak tree, in a spot where the attic window was visible. It seemed fitting, the dog who had led her upward, resting in the shadow of the place where everything had changed. On the headstone, she carved a simple message. Solomon. He found me when I was lost. He led me when I was blind. He loved me when I was broken. The best friend I ever had. And beneath that, the date of their first meeting, the cold November morning when she had walked into a shelter and met a dog with one eye, 3 legs, and a mission that defied all explanation. Visitors still come to Martha's house from time to time. The shelter sends families her way, the ones who are considering a difficult dog, a senior dog, a dog that others have given up on. Martha sits with them in her garden and tells them about Solomon. She tells them about the way he looked at her in that shelter cage, as if he had been waiting for her his whole life. She tells them about the attic, the floorboard, the letters that had waited 40 years to be found. She tells them about Eleanor's visions and the impossible journey that had brought them all together. Most of all, she tells them about love. Broken things need the most love, she says, echoing the words her sister spoke to her all those years ago. And they give the most in return. Don't be afraid of the ones no one else wants. Sometimes they're the ones who change your life. The families listen. Some of them understand. Some of them don't. But every now and then, one of them will look out at the garden, at the headstone beneath the oak tree, at the attic window, gleaming in the afternoon light. And something will shift in their expression, a softening, an opening, a willingness to believe in things that can't be explained. Those are the ones who adopt the difficult dogs. Those are the ones who find their own miracles. And Martha watches them go with a smile on her face and peace in her heart, knowing that somewhere, beyond time, beyond sight, beyond everything that separates us from those we love, Eleanor and Solomon are watching too. Some dogs find us, some dogs save us, and some dogs do both. Solomon had done both, and Martha would carry him with her in the chambers of her heart where love lives forever, until the day she joined him on the other side. The end, or perhaps, more accurately, the beginning. Because every ending is also a beginning. Every goodbye is also a hello, echoing across the vast expanse of time and space and love. Every broken thing that finds its way to wholeness is just the start of another story, waiting to unfold. Martha knew that now. She knew it in her bones, in her blood, in the very fiber of her being. And she was grateful. Grateful for the sister who had loved her enough to leave. Grateful for the dog who had found her when she was lost. Grateful for every single moment of her complicated, heart-breaking, beautiful life. She sat in her garden as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The attic window caught the light and glowed like a beacon, like a promise, like a reminder of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular, and to everyone who had ever mattered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me that miracles are real." and the evening wind carried her words away, out over the garden, over the town, over the mountains, to all the broken things still waiting to be found, to all the miracles still waiting to happen, to all the love still waiting to change the world, one adoption at a time, one connection at a time, one impossible, beautiful, broken dog at a time.